right. Well, hi everybody. Good day. Welcome to another Gimmal Education Session. My name is Marcia Shields and I'm from our customer success team. Our goal for these sessions is to enhance your expertise with your Gimmal software. We are recording this session and it will be shared after the event as well as posted on our Gimmal YouTube site. Jeff Tuish is with me today. Jeff is going to be your subject matter expert, and he's going to be talking about both Gimmal Records and Gimmal Discover. Jeff's going to talk about the integration and synergy between both of those products. So appreciate you being here. Jeff, next slide, please. Terrific, thanks. So this year, for those that this might be their first education session, we are running a Gimmal All-Star program. And really what this is to thank you for all your efforts for joining these sessions, taking the time to learn more about the software, and hopefully you're gaining from that. But we also want to reward and recognize your efforts. So for each education session that you attend, whether that's register or attend live, as well as participate in our LinkedIn polls that we post out the week prior, and also post-session surveys, you will be earning points. I will be tracking those points. And once you reach 3,000, you will earn all-star status and get one of our very cool pins. So we thank you for all doing this and stay tuned for recognitions at the end of the quarter. The format for the session today is going to be the same, 15 to 20 minutes of Jeff overviewing the products with demonstration, followed by 10 minutes for your questions. All questions can be posted in the Q&A area of your Zoom. You can find that, and then we will address them after. First, Jeff, before I hand it over to you, I am going to launch a poll for everybody. If you could take a minute. Our question for this session really is, are you leveraging the synergy between Gimmal Discover and Gimmal Records? So I will let that run as more people roll into, and I'll let you guys know the answers after. So Jeff, I think I can hand things off to you and you can start your talk today.
Great, thanks, Marcia.
You bet.
So I'm trying to advance the slide. It doesn't seem to want to do that with the poll question up.
Okay.
And now well, isn't that special? Bear with me, everybody. For some reason, we're not deciding to show that. There we go.
Okay.
Gotta love when the technology works. Okay, so Marcia said, my name is Jeff Tuish, and before we jump into the synergy about Discover and Records, how about we talk about what they are? Because I'm not quite sure who's all here today, but some of you might be Gimmal Discover people, other might be Gimmal Records, and might not know about the other products. So with that said, let me get a quick overview of each. So Gimmal Discover, what it does is it performs information governance on a variety of data sources. You're going to see here the ones that we have in common with Gimmal Records. So Gimmal Discover and Gimmal Records both do Box, OneDrive, SharePoint, Windows file shares. So I'll be focusing on those data sources today. So what Gimmal Discover is, I like to draw a fork in the road here between Discover and Records. So Gimmal Discover can go out and perform rot remediation and help you to identify files, emails, what have you, that you no longer want, and you want to go ahead and informally dispose of them, like having a retention period for email. Whereas Gimmal Records is a much more formalized product that can help you manage your records, to lock them in place and then eventually delete them based upon the criteria that you establish. So I hope that gives you a good idea of the overview between the two. So why is it they work together? Well, Gimmal Discover can actually go in and look at content of files. Gimmal Records can look at metadata. So you'll see there's a little chasm there. If Discover can look at metadata and content, but Records only metadata, then how is there synergy? Well, we're going to be talking about a thing called classification. In Gimmal Discover, we can classify based upon criteria that you establish. We can classify files and add a classification to a file, actually to the physical file itself. Gimmal Records can then pick that up, that metadata, that label that was assigned by Discover, and be able to use that in its criteria to determine dispositioning of those records. So that's where the synergy lies. So let's talk about how we can interrogate the data to make some decisions on not only what we want to classify, but then how Gimmal Records can then use that information to be able to perform dispositioning. So you're going to see here down below in the metadata operators, we have the various types of data, age, date, time, numeric, and text. And you're going to see the operators that we have. A lot of these are antonyms, opposites, contraries, whatever you like to call them. So for age, older or newer than, equals, not equals, after, before, equals, not equals, for date, time. Numeric has those as well. And then text has a little bit more options for you as well. So you get some things that you can do with the metadata in the testing. So this is a ways to be able to qualify a file to have a particular label put on. You can use any of these operators on these conditions. If I go to the next slide, then you're going to see we can get into content. So in Discover, we can look at use for keywords. Like maybe I want to look for the word invoice, and I want to apply an invoice label to any file that has the word invoice inside of it. Or I could do a phrase which has an embedded space that is enclosed within double quotes. Or I can do a wildcard, as we see here for transfer. So this would find transfer, transferring, transferred, all the different tenses of a verb, for instance. And then we get into the Boolean expression. So you have a lot of power in here. So you can use the ands and the ors and the nots and the proximity, the parentheses, like you would for order of operations for mathematical equations. You can use all these together to be able to help you fully qualify a file. So I could say John Smith and transfer wildcard. So I could put that on there, and both of those must be present for that to happen. If I put parentheses around those, now I'm getting even more granular with my criteria. So use your imagination here. You got a lot of ways to identifying both metadata and content by Discover to see what files should I apply a label to. And then we get down, whoops, I wasn't quite ready for that yet. Let me go back. Then we get into regex. Regex, if any of you have entered the dark world of regex, pardon me, it is a way to do pattern matching. So if you want to look for, I'm going to use social security numbers as an example. If I want to look for a numeric pattern of 3-2-4, I can do that with regex. And I can also go through and apply intelligence around that to be able to say, hey, if you start with 000 as a social, I know that's false because they don't start with zeros. Or the first digit can't be greater than 7 because those haven't been issued yet. So you can put a lot of intelligence around your regex to be able to help you find that data. So with classification, what we're going to do is we're going to analyze and identify that different content and metadata, and then we're going to assign a label. So how do we do that? I'll be showing you that in a bit. In fact, we're going to walk through both how Gimmal Discover can apply those labels and what labels you apply, and then we'll see in Gimmal Records how we can use that value. But first, I want to dive into records. Once again, here we are with the same data sources. And now we also have the different metadata operators. So now when I'm checking that label value that Gimmal Discover has applied, then I can use any of these operators. So the one I gave you is, most of these are pretty self-explanatory, but then we have the in, which means it contains, once again, the wildcard, the matches using regex, not equal to, starts with any new metadata attribute that you might have, and the classification label. So we have a lot of different things that we can check. So what this does, it provides Gimmal Discover and Gimmal Records the ability to bridge that chasm between those two and be able to supply you with logic that you can use when you have both products. So where can I do this inside of Gimmal Records? Well, there's 3 places. You can do it in the classification rules for your record class. You can do it in your legal hold rules, and you can also do it in your triggers. You know, they also have date and event triggers, but rules is also one of the triggers where you can do that. So before I go, we're not doing questions and answers yet, I promise. What we're going to do first is we're going to go in and show you Gimmal Discover. So this is labels that were applied to files within Gimmal Discover. So you're going to see the various labels, and these are at your discretion. You can make up whatever labels you want. So don't think we're forcing labels on you. We aren't. And what this is showing you is every file that has a label, what is the percentage of the files with that label? If I hover over the pie chart, I'll actually see that number. So these are the labels that you can assign. So how did we get these labels on? Well, I'm going to go into what we call the workflow editor inside of Gimmal Discover. And what this does for us, this is where we interrogate the data and say, are you equal to this value? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to simulate something for you. And this is for Windows file shares. And these What we call these are the metadata. This metadata is going to vary based upon, if you're in Box, it's going to be something different than SharePoint, what have you. But this is all the different ways that you can interrogate the data to make decisions. So I can look at the inclusion or exclusion of the extension for the file, its age using any one of the available dates, its attributes. Are you a system or read-only file, its size, its file name? Once again, if you remember back to the operators that we had, we can do equals to or contains or a wildcard. So any textual value, I have different operators than I would for instance, with the age, which is a numeric check. So all these things can be used in here in determining how do I want to interrogate the data, and then once I have, what label do I apply? So I have some examples up here, and I'm going to dive into the first one, which is I want to look first for PII, which is personal identifiable information. And in this case, I want to find a social security number. So I'm not going to bore you with the gory details, but this is the regex that goes out, the intelligent regex that goes out and finds matching values or matching pattern values inside of the content of the files. So if this was true and we did have a match, notice it's very binary in the flow. If we didn't find a match, the flow goes to the right. If we did find a match, the flow goes down. In this case, it says, I want to tag this file with one of the labels that I created with inside the Gimmal Discover portal. So in this case, I'm saying I want to put the SSN label on. And then what happens is, okay, if I didn't find a social security number, now I want to go out and I have a search expression that I want to use. And notice it's a whole bunch of ors. This is where I could use the ands. Notice the phrases here are enclosed within double quotes. So this is where you can do all of your fun Boolean expression. And you're going to see the example down here of how you can do that. So here's a search phrase and the ands and the wildcard, the ors and nots, the parentheses. So once again, use your imagination on that. Don't think that you're hamstrung and you can only do one thing. That is not the case. You have a lot of power in here, which is why we don't have any two clients doing anything the same way, because there's millions of permutations that can occur out of this. So what happens is, okay, well, I didn't find a social. Okay, now I want to go look for a keyword that identifies the file as a contract. Well, I didn't find that, and I could keep going horizontally, or I could double qualify things. I said, well, I know that you're a social, but maybe I want to put another decision in here based upon something else. So I can stack these vertically or horizontally. Anybody who's ever done any coding, we're basically doing conditionals, if, else, then kind of things. So what this is saying is, if it's going to the right, these are or conditions. Well, it's not equal to that, or it's not equal to that. If you're stacking them vertically, they're ands, because both conditions must be true for the blue box, which is the action to actually occur. So this is how we construct the classification workflow inside of Gimmal Discover. So we can go ahead and interrogate all that metadata. We also have the ability to check all the content as well, looking for those matches and assigning these particular classification labels. So as I said earlier, these labels are actually part of the data. So if that file gets moved, that label is going to persist. It gets moved with it. So that label is actually stored in some additional field that Microsoft allows you to use programmatically. And that's where we have the label inside there. Now, I'll be honest, if somebody opens up this file in File Explorer and looks at it, will they see the label? They will not. It's a programmatic assignment and a programmatic reference to it as well. So it's not being it's not visual or externalized to the user, but it is part of the file itself. So now that we have that and we know how we've applied the label, and we talked about the places where Gimmal Records can use that label value. So once again, Gimmal Records is being able to interrogate all the metadata. And what you're going to see here, for those of you who have never seen Gimmal Records, this is the conditionals and how you create them. A little bit different than Discover. And what you're going to see here is we're saying, okay, I want to look at the SharePoint content type. Is it equal to email? And notice the join here. And the subject is like, which is the pattern match, has PII. Notice those are asterisks around PII here. And then we have an or condition, which generated this dotted blue line, which means, okay, if that's true, or if the altitude label, which is the name of the metadata that Gimmal Discover creates, is equal to PII. So if referencing back, here I'm signing, if I had actually assigned a label here, and I had a PII label, this would come full circle, but this is going through and assigning a label here, and then Gimmal Records is going out and interrogating that value. So that's inside the legal hold rule. So legal hold basically says, I want to put a record on hold if this is true. And on hold, for you who don't know Gimmal Records, that actually is going to say no dispositioning. The file is never deleted until this legal hold has been removed. So it usurps all of that formal dispositioning I talked about. That's all gone because legal hold wins over everything. Where else can we do this inside of Gimmal Records? We also have a trigger. And a trigger, what that does for you people who have never seen records, it basically says, I want to start a process. It's the trigger. The trigger fires. And in this case, once again, we're saying is the altitude label equal to PII. And here's all those operators I talked about on the slides that we have be able to use inside of Gimmal Records. So we can have it on the trigger. We can have it on the legal hold, and we can also have it in the classification rules. Last explanation about what you're looking at now within Gimmal Records. Gimmal Records, you maintain classes, which you'll see over here, like HUM, so Human Resources 01, 03, so on and so on. You can make up these classes, and for each class, you can create a classification rule, which basically is telling Gimmal Records, hey, when any of these conditions are true, I want to register, basically, that file into that class. And then that class is going to have its own dispositioning process that says how old before we actually delete that file. So that's what Gimmal Records does for you, is that formal dispositioning out here. So in this case, we're saying, is the altitude label equal to PII, or these two conditions are true, or these two conditions are true, or lastly, this condition is true. So this is going to say that now I know where my records are going to be classified based upon this criteria. And for those of you who don't know, every record should be falling into a class. Gimmal Records does have the way of showing you if you have all these record classes and you didn't properly construct your classification rules, a file could actually fall out of all of them and be unclassified, which basically means it has no retention and it is maintained permanently. So if that's not your intention, then that's when somebody would need to come in and create either a new classification rule or update an existing one to make sure that all your records are being dispositioned properly based upon this metadata check that we're doing. So that's the synergy between Gimmal Records and Gimmal Discover. So like I said, it's a fork in the road here. So what I like to describe with these two products working together, let's say that somebody says, hey, I have a whole bunch of data sitting on my Windows file share, and I don't know what's out there. It's the wild, wild west. People are saving everything. I don't know if there's sensitive data. I don't know if there's proprietary data. I don't know what I have. Well, that's where Gimmal Discover comes in and says, okay, let's start going through this content and start applying these labels. So here's a confidential label to only 0.1%, but if we're looking at 1 billion files out here, that's a significant number. So this allows us to go through and interrogate that content, looking for that data. Now when it comes time and says, okay, Gimmal Records, now when it starts maintaining these, the typical fork in the road is anything that has a label that requires formal dispositioning would be managed by Gimmal Records. If it doesn't have a label, a possibility is Gimmal Discover will then enforce the retention on that informally. So it doesn't require approval. It just goes out and say, hey, any file greater than 10 years last accessed on this file share, I want to delete it unless I have a label assigned. In that case, leave that alone because I know Gimmal Records is then going to manage that properly, disposition it formally, so we have a full audit trail of everything that happens. So Gimmal Discover, I like to say, being the triage product, it can go through and find the things you need to find and then be able to classify and not classify, more importantly, the things that don't require one. Gimmal Discover then takes care of that data, whereas Gimmal Records will handle all the things that have been labeled by Gimmal Discover. So I hope that gives you a good idea of where the synergy is between the two products, because that label is very, very important to be able to share for both. So back to the slides.
Great job,
Nope.
Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Good
There we
info.
are.
Good info. Yeah, so we do have a few questions,
Okay.
and just for curiosity's sake, our poll question that we started with, are you leveraging the strategy between Gimmal Records and Discover? It was a resounding no. I did not know there was any. So
Darn it.
this was a great topic to cover today.
Awesome.
Jeff, first question for you. Can multiple workflows be combined into a single workflow?
Yes, you can definitely do that. And that's where those decision boxes come in. Now, something I didn't show you, for any of you that have ever done any coding, there's a way to actually structure the process and the workflow as well. If you have interest in that, let me know. But yes, Marcia, the answer is yes to that question.
Okay, figured so much, but great. Second question is, if a file is moved after being classified by Discover, does the label persist?
It does. It does. So
Okay.
that's the good news on this. And something I didn't cover from the classification. This is something we would do once. So you would go through and classify all of your legacy data. And typically we do that by age ranges. So let's go after the files older than 10 years, 5 years, and keep tightening the screws, as I like to call it, getting down. But then from that point, you never have to look at that data again to classify because we've already done so. So then we can actually have a policy that goes out and classifies only on the newest thing. So if we run this once a week, we can say, I only want to look at the files now that have been added or modified in the past week. And then that's a perpetual process that runs.
Okay. Another question is, can the classification label be updated by Discover?
It can. And one of the options in the classification policy is to say, hey, you know what? I messed up. I had bad criteria. I want to apply a different label than what I had assigned. So you actually put the checkbox and say, yes, I do want to overwrite the existing. Let me give you a little segue on this. So one of the things I recommend, because classification does update the file, what I recommend, we also have a module inside of Discover called Data Governance, and we can simulate the classification process in data governance without updating the files. So what that's going to do for you is allow you to go through and do simulations or what if scenarios and saying, give me the report that would show me the labels that I would apply if I were to be classifying right now. So that gives you a chance to go through and perfect your criteria, knowing that, oh, you know what, I put the wrong label on. So instead of putting the wrong label on, let's go through that process in data governance and be able to see that report and going, okay, now my confidence is high. I'm ready to apply the labels. But if you do apply the labels, can you update them? Yes. That was a long answer for that question, wasn't it?
That's all right. That's all right. There's a follow-up though, too. So can the classification labels be the record class?
Oh, that's interesting. Sure. So yes, if you wanted to go into Discover and make your record classes be the classification label, that's going to remove all doubt, quite honestly, inside of Gimmal Records, what class they're supposed to be in. So you'll be much, that's actually a great idea. You would actually be able to, if you had all that, your confidence of having no unclassified records is going to be much higher because you've already assigned a label that you want to be the record class. So that's an interesting scenario. I like that idea.
Okay. And just one more, unless anybody else would like to post one, but the last one so far is, can the classification rule check multiple labels assigned by Discover?
Yes. So you can go through and you can assign as many different labels as you want. Now, I wouldn't go crazy. I mean, we recommend typically 100. We have a client that only does 4. So, I mean, it's totally your call. You're not going to want to have hundreds of record classes either, typically in records, because what you're going to find out is a lot of them are going to be very similar and you could probably group them together. But yes, Discover can assign multiple labels, different labels, depending on the content and metadata. And you also have the ability to do a priority on this. If I have a label, 2 different labels that would apply, you get to, in the workflow, be able to decide which one is more important to you. So if it has PII and it has the word contract, which one wins?
Okay, great. You were off the hot seat, Jeff. That's all the questions we have today. If you could go to the next slide and we'll wrap up here, that would be terrific. Okay, great. So yeah, that's our session today, everybody. Thanks for attending. We hope you enjoyed this. We hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions or want to talk about either of these products and how they work together, feel free to reach out to me or your Gimmal representative. Here's the schedule remaining for Q1. So we do have a couple things coming up for Gimmal Physical and Gimmal Discover. We're working on Q2, so stay tuned for that. We will also, this being recorded, I will email this to all of you soon. We'll get this out in your hands. But otherwise, thanks again for joining. We really appreciate it. Have a great day, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.